Hello and welcome back to CupofTCG. It's only been about 8 months since our last upload. I would say we apologise, but we've been enjoying Flesh and Blood a little bit too much to actually make videos. So apologies about that, but Flesh and Blood's fun. I'm joined by Callum. We've got quite an interesting video coming up for you today. Callum, you've always been a bit of a Dori player. And then, what was this, 2:30 a.m, the night of the day of the ProQuest down our local, and you were like, you know what, let's make a new deck.
Yeah, so I I decided to play hybrid Dorinthea with Dawnblade and hatchets. I had this little hive mind crazy brain idea the night before that I would try and attack the meta on two fronts, if you will. Yeah, just sort of stayed up late scribbling out my deck list, and it went okay, to be fair. Top four the next day, so
Yeah, I mean, can't really complain when you're 2:30 a.m, half asleep ramblings are just like, you know what, actually this has gone pretty well. So let's jump into the deck real quick. So you mentioned this is a hatchets kind of hybrid list. Why hybrid?
So I believe I think if you look at the sort of the decks from ProQuest Weekend One, you see that like Oldhim specifically had a really good weekend, and I think Hatchets have a pretty phenomenal Oldhim matchup. Kind of like the main reason to play the deck, to be honest. Valiant Dynamo just gives you so much value over the course of the game, blocking Winter as well, which obviously is not going to be for much
May it
longer.
rest in peace.
Yeah, but so it was kind of like a meta call based on the week one results that I would try and find the Oldims in the event. There only actually ended up being two of them at the event, but that's why we included Dawnblade as well. So Dawnblade is sort of security for the Fire matchup and the Dromai matchup, which were a little bit more represented than Oldim at the event.
Talk to me about the actual deck itself. We've looked at the weapons, which some classes, me on Ranger, don't have the luxury of kind of signing into. What about the rest of the deck? What are we looking at here in this 42 card main deck?
So with the main deck, the main priority for me was to play cards that are relevant in both forms of the deck. So there's a few cards in here that are definitely not relevant in both forms of the deck. So in the swing is a little bit harder to play in Dawnblade, but my philosophy of this deck was that I was only going to be playing Dawnblade into decks that I could pretty much guarantee the second swing on. So your fires, your Dromais. I did have to play it into Icelander because Hatchets has a pretty terrible time into Icelander, but with some of the little combat tricks that Dorinthea has, I think it was the correct choice into Icelander. But you'll notice there's a lot of cards missing from a normal Dorinthea deck. So there's no Twinning Blade, there's no Singing Steel Blade, there's less +3 pumps than I'd like, there's no Overpower. And a lot of the reason for those cards not being in here is because those cards are best in Dawnblade lists when you're playing against opponents that want to block you. And as I said earlier, I'm not playing the Dawnblade into decks that want to block me, which basically makes the hybrid plan viable because I save on so many spaces when playing Dawnblade. So, for example, into Fi, I'm looking to just swing, build up counters. You'll see on the sideboard later, there's the stuff like the Prides and the Glistening Steel Blades and the stuff that are really good into decks that don't want to block.
Fuck that card, by the way.
Yeah,
absolutely ruined me. The one
Yeah.
Dori I played against as Alexi, it was like, okay, you have 7 counters on your Dawnblade now. Guess I die.
Yeah, so that's actually like a bit of an interesting consideration for me was which plan to play into Lexi. She doesn't block very well, but you also block her really well.
Yeah.
So I ended up playing Hatchets on the day, but I think that may have been the wrong choice. But we squeaked that win out. But yeah, so the main considerations for the main deck is cards being viable in both plans.
Yep.
As you'll see here, there's 2 blue Blade Runners in the main deck that don't actually work on Dawnblade because it's target one-handed weapon, but it's blue and it blocks for 3. So shaving spaces out of the sideboard, it's viable enough to go in the Dawnblade list. it might pay for a Warrior's Valor turn. It might block 3. That's fine. That's fine. Sorry.
It's one of those like decision trees we've been seeing with a lot of decks recently, right? Is it blue? Does it block 3? Yes, it goes in the deck.
Yeah, a card doesn't particularly have to do too much more than that
Yeah.
to make it into the list, but Warrior has some really, really high value blues like Glint the Quicksilver and Blue Overpower. Both of these cards are pretty phenomenal blues, which
Yeah,
make it
this is
into
really good.
both variants of the deck. So yeah, I wouldn't normally play cards like Red Warrior's Valor and Steelblade Supremacy in a Hatchets list because you kind of want that guaranteed go again, not so much the conditional go again.
Mm.
And Supremacy obviously only targets one of your weapons, and in Hatchets you want to swing both of them. So Steelblade Supremacy is definitely a consideration to cut in this list.
Okay. One thing which people might have noticed, at least in the main board, is that you're running the 3 E-strikes, and historically those other Dorinthea decks, you usually only run the 1 Nourishing Emptiness, purely because it has that guaranteed dominate. Why did you choose E-strike over just that 1 card? Is it purely because you can pump out more damage across the turn?
So I've always found E-strike to be pretty amazing in Hatchets. So it does a few little tricks, like puts end game cards on the bottom of the deck without your opponent seeing them.
Right.
So Spillbloods, Rout, those sort of cards, you get to tuck those for later on in the game, and your opponent doesn't see it.
Cool.
You get to go wider. It's an amazing 2-card hand. It's a great Arsenal target. Yeah, you can do things like Spores of War, Dawnblade, get blocked, E-strike for 7.
Right.
Just like pretty value hands. I think it's just such a flexible card that it can go in both lists. Again, one of the main design philosophies of this deck was the cards need to be viable in both lists, or the power cards need to be viable in both lists. Stuff like the resource base and that sort of thing don't necessarily need to be so useful. But yeah, the E-strikes are really useful in Hatchets, and they're pretty fine in Dawnblade as well.
Awesome. Well, let's have a quick look at the sideboard itself, actually, before we go into the breakdown of what comes in for what matchup and what comes out for certain matchups. So, anything here that you wanted to explicitly touch on? I see 1 Remembrance, which has been trending in price recently. It feels like people are finally getting on the Remembrance bandwagon. Is there 1 card here or a couple of cards here which are like, oh, I put this in for this reason?
Yeah. So the main thing about the sideboard that I really like about the deck is if you cut the Norrin pieces out, because it's a 27 card sideboard. The main deck is 42 cards, so you need to sideboard in 18 cards for every game. And this sideboard is effectively 3 sets of 9 cards. So you have a 9-card Hatchet sideboard, which is your 3 red Blade Runners, your 3 yellow Blade Runners, and the 3 Spillbloods. And you have a 9-card Dorinthea sideboard, which is the Ironsong Prides, the Glistening Stillblades, and the Run-Throughs. Again, the Dawnblade cards you're adding in are really the cards that capitalize against the decks that don't want to block you.
Yeah.
So I'm not siding in Singing Stillblades, I'm not siding in Twinning Blades, all that sort of stuff.
I like
face rush Dawnblade.
I like that you said you siding the Hatchet cards and you side in the Dorinthea cards, and not the Dawnblade cards. It's like, oh, these are the cards that you usually see in Dorinthea decks, and like the Spillbloods and your Blade Runners are cards which, like, okay, like if you're putting it in, you're putting in some form of spice, and I suppose, well, you've gone for a battle on both fronts with this list, right?
Yeah, so the third set of 9 cards is your standard sort of sideboard cards, your Sink Blows, your Oasis Respites, Remembrance, and Epots. You're basically siding in a combination of any of these 27 cards into every matchup. So, for example, against a deck like Dash, I wouldn't just side in the 9 Hatchets cards and the 9 sideboard cards.
Right.
Unfortunately, some of the Dawnblade sideboard would have to make its way into the deck as well, because I'd want a higher block value across the deck.
Gotcha.
So against decks like Dash, you do sort of water down your game plan by having dead cards like I side in Run-Throughs because they're yellow and they block 3, and that's more valuable to me than like an E-Pot that's not going to block me, going to block for me on a key turn.
So in those matchups, let's talk about Dash specifically. Do you bring in more than 60 cards, or do you still aim to like keep to that base of 60 cards in the deck?
So I actually played Dash in round 4 in Swiss, and I really didn't know what plan to go for. I had basically teched this deck for Oldhim and Fi. Dawnblade's pretty good into Dromai anyway, but I was hoping to dodge Dash, to be honest,
Mm.
and I didn't really know what the plan was. I ended up going Hatchets and hoping my opponent would try and boost rush me down. Ended up going Pistol, which was quite scary for me because I can't really disrupt the pistol game plan, and I basically just had to go as fast as humanly possible.
Right.
Which in hatchets is not easy because it's not a deck that pumps out a great deal of damage.
Mm.
When you get like the turns where you can swing 3 times with hatchets, it's pretty good, or you get an E strike in the middle of a chain. But as you'll see, the hatchets list against Dash is playing 3 glistening steel blades and 3 run-throughs, which don't particularly do a lot, but that's fine. They block Dash's cards, so that's okay. I actually ended up winning that game with Steel Blade Shunt. I got my opponent to 1. Um, it was the last card in the hand I drew. I was drawing my
Fair
last
enough.
hand, and I was like, please, this is like my only out, and I got a little bit lucky in that game. So
Can't complain. I mean, they're in for a
yeah,
reason, right?
yeah, for sure. They're absolutely amazing into Oldhim as well.
So let's. This is probably the main reason you ran the deck, right? The amount of Oldhams. You kind of touched on it earlier.
Mm,
Let's have a look at this Oldham list, and even
mm.
though he might not be as much of a threat right now due to the recent bans, thank you, James White. Let's have a look and kind of see how you were able to, well, in your words on the day, run rings around Oldham.
Yeah.
Give me a run through. So obviously the hatchets and the dynamo are in.
Yeah, so the main reason to play this deck was Oldhim, and I was expecting more Oldhim, like I said earlier. There was only 2. My quarterfinals game was against Ryan, who was on Oldhim. He was on Oldhim the weekend before in Leeds and made top 8 in the ProQuest. Congrats to him. Huge event. Um,
Massive.
so yeah, so I played Hatchets for Oldhim. The main reason is Valiant Dynamo gets so much value throughout the course of a game because of Winterswell. God rest its soul. Um,
F.
and just the sort of chip damage you get in with hatchets and the really stellar end game plan you have with Spill Blood. Um, Oldhim is a matchup where you're really afforded the time to set up your end game. He wants to go to the pitch stack. You want to go to the pitch stack, and you kind of do the end game better than him.
Mm.
Um, believe it or not, there's not a lot of decks that can say that. But so throughout the course of the game, I'm sort of happy to block with 2 cards, keep a 2-card hand, swing back 2 hatchets off of a blue and Blade Runner, or hit and run, or Spores of War, some assortment of those go again cards, um, and then just remove the counter from my Dynamo, be able to block again with it,
Right.
and just sort of chip damage away throughout the whole game. There was multiple times in this game against Ryan where I would tuck Spill Blood back to the bottom of my deck with E Strikes or Sink Belows or Crown of Providence and cards like that, and just secure my end game. There was a point in the game where I think I was close to 15, 20 life up on Oldhim, and he was sub 10, and I still had 2 Spill Bloods in the deck. And at that point, you kind of feel the game is closed because
Yeah.
you just have so much momentum and so much of a life lead, that yeah, it really feels like a pretty favoured matchup, and that's the whole reason to play this list over just a pure Dawnblade list, because Oldhim is a real hard matchup for Dawnblade.
Yeah. I don't know what, if any, success just standard Dawnblades Doris had into Oldhams. I don't think there was that matchup, at least over our ProQuest. I'm sure it happened during Leeds when we were there. Have you done that matchup before? Is it actually dire? Is this just like flat out like head and shoulders above the original Dawnblade plan?
So it is a lot harder work to make the Dawnblade plan work into Oldhim. I think something that I've seen Josh Lau of the Card Guys try is like 8 Steelblade Shunts,
Jesus.
um, stuff like that, just to get like 8 free damage over the course of the game. But yeah, Steelblade Shunt is a real sort of um, phenomenal card in that matchup as well. Similar to the Oasis Respite, which I also included 2 copies of in this matchup, just to get around the dominate stuff, and actually plays around CNC Pummel really nicely as well.
Yep.
Um, so that's like a really cool aspect of the deck. Your tunic counter is very valuable in this matchup. But yeah, Dawnblade into Oldhim is quite hard. You have to really work to get counters through. I think more often than not, it kind of just tend to be more valuable to just go for like really big swings and push some damage over the top of blocks. But you kind of run your threat density pretty thin against Oldhim.
So you, as we mentioned earlier, and you've talked through, the deck was originally teched for Oldhim, but it also has a pretty decent matchup into some other decks in the field. Was it only you only played one Oldhim over the weekend, right? Which is kind of kind of unfortunate.
So I guess the game came where it mattered, right? It was my quarterfinals game.
Yeah.
I actually ended up winning that game, but I conceded the loss to Ryan because he had like I say, he's a sort of teammate of ours, and he had a much better chance into the field. I think there was a 5-0 Icelander, which is not an easy matchup for this deck, and just another couple of matchups that I didn't really want to see. So I was pretty happy for him to take that one. He ended up getting second as well, which probably proves that I made the right choice. But technically a top 4 deck, but didn't actually play the top 4.
So we'll put top 4 on the title. It's all good. We got you.
Yeah. So I think the deck's also pretty reasonable into Fi, who I was expecting more of. Again, I didn't actually play a Fi, but the sort of cards that Dynasty and Classic Battles brought us for aggro matchups is really strong. So Ironsong Pride and Glistening Steelblade, to be specific, are really great.
You saying, Dynasty, this new set, it was really good, gave us a nice couple of cards, and also Classic Battles. I mean, hey, what? I mean, it's literally Run Through and Glistening Steelblade it gave you, right?
Yeah, which are like Run Through is Yellow Blade Runner for 2-handed weapons. Like it's literally that card, and Yellow Blade Runner is good in one-handed weapon decks. So Run Through is good in Dawnblade, because if your opponent's not going to block your first swing, which they don't really, this really punishes them. They get to deal with a Dawnblade for 5, threatening a counter on the second swing, and all you've done is spend one card at that point.
Yep.
So yeah, really great card, especially for that sort of matchup. And your Glistening Steelblade, if you get to push Glistening Steelblade counters through, you're probably going to roll that game.
Yeah, fuck this card. So you've seen the cards kind of pop up on the screen now. We're looking at the Dawnblade list. So this being the Fi list, give me a quick run through of Fi.
So I didn't actually play a Fi over the weekend, but so I mean this may be a bit messy again into Fi, but you're really just trying to see your Ironsong Prides and your Glistening Steelblades. The Blade Runners, I mean, 5 of them are resource cards, 3 of them just block 3, which is okay. It's better than playing the Epots that are in the sideboard for Icelander. I don't want to play them into Fi. I'm also already playing Ironsong Prides, which don't block, which is a bit risky, but really worth it into that matchup.
So we had a, slightly off topic, we had like a massive case opening for Dynasty, and I think we pulled a playset of these, didn't you and me split a case, and your initial impression was this card sucks.
Yeah, I was not a fan of this card when I first saw it.
What changed? Was it just like looking at the card more, understanding it a little bit more, or was it just, oh, actually it does just work pretty well?
So I think the main thing that's good about this card is it allows you to really out-tempo aggro decks. If you see this card early, or God forbid you see multiple of this card early, you will just run away with the game. At the time that I was playing Dorinthea, when Dynasty came out, it was very much a mid-range, big attack reaction, sort of slower type of deck, and I wasn't really considering how Dori was playing into Fires.
Right.
But yeah, once I started seeing this card doing work the weekend before in Leeds, I just kind of knew that you could make this sort of like 9 cards sideboard into decks that just weren't going to block you, and really be able to trim on the cards that weren't valuable into those matchups.
Yeah, I mean, essentially this card reads Dorinthea's effect, ignore it. Dawnblade's effect, ignore it, and here's a token, right, for one. And I think being able to get almost unlimited, just unlimited value off of this, and of course Glistening Steelblade as well, is a bit bonkers. This card, like, we knew this card was going to be good. The fact that I think it still trends for like 25, 30 quid on card market, and it only being printed in the Doom Invested Rhinar deck is a pain in the ass, but also, thank God, that means that not every single Dorinthea I'm playing against is running 3 of this card.
Yeah, I think the thing about Glistening Steelblade and Ironsong Pride is that well, Glistening Steelblade specifically, it was becoming a sideboard card
Right.
because it was you had to play such a greedy turn to manage to actually get this to hit. It's such hard work to get this to hit against decks that block you really well. A card like Supremacy or Spores of War or Warrior's Valor has the like +2 or +3 pump, like added onto the card. Glistening doesn't do that, so your Dawnblade is still coming in for 3. But against decks that like Fi, who have a really high 2-block density, you can pretty much guarantee you're going to hit through with this.
Yeah.
Especially paired with like a Sharpened Steel or something beforehand. But yeah, the thing about Ironsong Pride is really just it takes advantage of people who don't want to block you. So quite often you'll do a Dawnblade for 3, no cards beforehand, no prior pump, and I mean history has said that the correct thing to do in that situation is to not block. So you take 3, your opponent drops 2 Ironsong Prides,
Take 5.
you're really in trouble.
Yeah.
You're really in trouble from that point on in the game. Anyone who's played against Dorinthea knows that 2 counters is pretty dire. So
Yeah, try 5.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Lexi hates not this version of the deck, but she hates Dawnblade. And yeah, she's certainly not a fan of Dorinthea. So obviously you didn't get to play into Fire, so we'll move on from Fire over to Icelander. Did you get to play this matchup?
I played my first 2 rounds were against Icelander.
Oh,
so I actually lost my first game, and I ended up submarining it my way to top 8 after that. So I went 4-0 after round 1. One of the key mistakes I made in the first game was holding an Oasis Respite too long and not just Oasis Respiting the first Aetherized Vein that got thrown at me. I was at quite a high life total, but unfortunately, looking back on the game, it stole so much tempo that I should have just Oasis Respite that Aetherized Vein. But this card specifically, Oasis Respite, really sort of epitomizes what I'm trying to do with this list. So I wanted to include red shunts or unmovables or some really big D-react for the older matchup and for Bravo if there was one, for example.
Yeah.
But those cards are too narrow and they don't do enough into the rest of the field. Oasis Respite was that perfect middle ground between being good into Oldhim and also being good into Icelander.
Yep.
So again, the deck is just trying to be as flexible as possible, and this is the card that did it for me. Looking back on the event, I would definitely play 2 epots rather than 3 and play a third Oasis Respite. I did manage to drop a few epots in the first game against Icelander, and that's what made it feel like I was going to win. But yeah, I just had the tempo stolen from me at the wrong time.
Is this for the paying over the Frostbites and the Insidious Trails, or is this for something else?
Yeah, it's effectively security against all of those tax cards to help me try and keep the cards in my hand. It also pays for a route out of nowhere that people don't expect, other attack reactions and stuff like that. But yeah, the epots they're more blues. And one thing about epot that's really great in Dawnblade is when you do like an unconditional go again.
Yep.
And get blocked, like fully blocked, you have something to do with your action point after Dawnblade. And dropping an epot after a blocked Spores of War Dawnblade is really devastating for Icelander.
Yeah. So we talked about your Icelander matchups. You had 2 of those. The first game, you lost. The second game, of course, you won. Didn't lose a game after that. You played against the Lexi, which we touched on earlier as well. The Dash. Dromai isn't a deck that we've talked about. What do you do into the Dromai matchup? I see that it's not something that you had a sideboard guide for in this, but obviously you had a plan, right? So how does that deck look?
So one concern for me about the Dromai matchup was this deck has absolutely no poppers. So it's got no 6-power cards, no Command and Conquer in this deck. I was just banking on the fact that Dawnblade is pretty good into Dromai. A really, really great Dromai player will do similarly to what the Dromai player I played against did, and not make many dragons, which makes it hard for you to keep counters on Dawnblade.
So for just touching on that real quick, for people who might be like, oh, but Dawnblade, wait, how's it getting counters? Hits. It does not specify a target. If Dawnblade is hitting Ash Wings, if it's hitting big dragons, it doesn't matter. Second time, it's getting that counter.
Yeah. So what actually ended up happening in that game is my opponent didn't create any dragons for a little while, and I actually managed to push a Glistening Steelblade swing over the top of one attack.
Oh wow, okay.
Which got me a counter early on. I had my second attack blocked, but from that point on, the one counter like sort of got me all the momentum I needed. My opponent used Silken Form to try and block another attack later on in the game, using the ability on Silken Form to make an Ash Ring just to try and get the value. And that Ash Ring actually helped me secure an Ironsong Pride hit, and that sort of momentum.
What can you do?
That sort of momentum just keeps me going throughout the game. There was a point at which I had 3 or 4 counters on Dawnblade.
Jesus Christ!
Like all you have to do in that situation is just do like you can even do like a blue hit and run with Go Again, hit the Ash Ring with a million counters on your Dawnblade, and then swing face for like 8 damage. And it's up to them to block the damage because they're not removing the counters because you've already hit this turn.
Yeah.
And it just puts your opponent puts your opponent in a really difficult position because they can't play their game plan, which is make dragons and hit you, and you just get to swing the most unfair weapon in the game, which is Dawnblade with counters on at people's face. 1 resource for anything above 3 damage is so valuable.
It's good, yeah. Poor unfortunate Dromai players. That's what you get, I suppose, playing Illusionist. Unlucky. So that was all of the matchups you played. It was the 2 Icelanders, the Lexi, the Dash, the Dromai, and then that final game into Ryan and Oldham in the quarters, which of course was a win, but you dropped because Ryan was playing Oldham and he was on a bit of a tear.
He was on a tear, yeah. I think after in the ProQuest the weekend before, he was 7-1 going into the top seed. Yeah. So I thought, let's let him close this one out.
There we go. Given, I think, I mean, him and the Icelander. I always forget his name. Unfortunately, he's come down a couple of times.
Zhang, I think.
Oh, Zhang. They ended up. I think they split the gold foil.
Split some prizing and split some prizing. Played the game out anyway. It was a
really good game to watch.
Yeah, it was a fantastic game. I would have absolutely folded into that Icelander.
Well, there we go. Easy dodge for you. So you've kind of had a few days now since the event, almost a week coming up. Are there any drastic changes you would make to the list? Are there things you would remove? Or things that you wish you added?
So I think one thing I'd say is obviously speaking about making the deck the night before, like at the early hours of the morning, there were some things that were pretty poor choices. I think Steelblade Supremacy doesn't belong in this list.
Okay.
It's pretty terrible in hatchets because you can only target 1 hatchet, and you basically pay 1 resource to make a hatchet a 1 resource snatch, which is not very good. The real benefit to hatchets is that a 2-card hand works pretty amazingly off of a blue. The second you start adding extra 1-cost cards like Steelblade Supremacy, it just ruins the sort of resource curve of the whole deck. I played it because it's good in Dawnblade, but I'm playing, as you can see, quite a low amount of attack reactions, so it's really hard to get your first Dawnblade swing to hit, and if you don't get your first Dawnblade swing to hit, you get almost no value out of Steelblade Supremacy.
Okay, so these get cut then? So all 3 get cut?
Yeah, I think I'd cut all 3 for 3 punctures. Okay. I think the card is just good in both plans. Really good card into Guardian as well. Helps you push Dawnblade over when you're playing that plan. Just sort of like another 1-cost card that is a little bit more flexible and does more for the game plans.
Is there anything else that you would adjust from there? I think you mentioned earlier about potentially cutting one of your epochs.
Yeah, so I'd cut an epot for a 3rd Oasis Respite. I think I play AB1 into Icelander and try and sort of go fast. I think AB1 and 3 Respites would sort of help me keep momentum in that matchup. The only other consideration would be maybe dropping down to 2 Ironsong Pride for another flexible card, but I do think you really want to see that card as early as possible into the matchups that you want to see it into, like Fire.
Do you see this list, this kind of hybrid hatchet list, still being competitive, or do you think now that one of the big bads is gone, this falls a little bit further down, or do you still think there's some decent opportunities for this deck to perform well?
I think the deck loses quite a bit of stock if Oldhim falls out of favour. We don't know if he will or not, but one of the real benefits of playing this deck is having that Valiant Dynamo value over the long course of the game on the 4
So
breakpoint
good,
weapon.
isn't it?
Which, if they end up playing Titan's Fist and it's always 4, maybe you get the value. If they play a Nothos and it's 6, you won't get the value. We'll see. I don't know. One thing I will say is Hypothermia going makes Dawnblade quite a lot better, because one thing you're always scared of playing Dawnblade is breaking your refraction bolters and getting hypothermiaed. There's nothing you can do about it, and it feels so bad. But Hypothermia going does make the Icelander matchup quite a bit better, I think.
Cool, Callum. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Then I mean, congratulations on how well the deck did, considering it was I mean, if we consider the circumstances, the fact it was 2:30 a.m. It's like, okay, I finished my deck list after like a mad change the night before. What was the original plan to play? Was it Dori or was it something else? Was it
I wasn't sure, to be honest, because the weekend before I'd played Brinar on the Saturday at Leeds and didn't go well, and then I played Bolton on the Sunday. Had a really fun day.
That was Battle Hardened ProQuest, right? So it's Battle Hardened Saturday, ProQuest Sunday.
Yeah, so I played both of those decks. I was thinking about playing Bolton combo again, but I don't know. I just felt if there was a load of Icelanders in a small event, I was just not going to be able to avoid them the same way that I would have been able to in a 160 player ProQuest in Leeds. I just took a gamble on this list, and yeah, I'm really happy with how it turned out. Really proud of the list. A few changes I'd make, but yeah, it performed how I wanted it to.
Fantastic. We'll chuck the list down below in the description, guys, for you to be able to have a look at. If you have any questions, then by all means, ping a message in the comments as well. Alternatively, just at Callum, he's in the Dori Discord on the Flesh and Blood main official Discord all the time. So just drop him a message if you have any questions or any queries. And yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks for joining me, Callum. We'll hopefully be back soon with more CupofTCG content. We said that last time, then 8 months passed. But yeah, we're all a little bit hyped for Outsiders and for what the rest of the year's.
Maybe we'll do some terrible predictions videos again.
Look, all I'm saying is that Combustion Point is still going to be a good card. Someone's going to make it good at some point. It's some crazy copium, but please don't make my predictions be wrong from all those months.
I'll be waiting.
Yeah, fantastic. Cool. Well, thanks for watching this, guys. We've been CupofTCG, and we'll catch you later. Bye.
Flashback.
Was there any...
this is wrong.
Oh my god.
There's 8 Blade Runners in here.
Change it!
Why is there 8
Change it quick.
Oh no, it's not wrong. It's because they all block.
Okay, I'm including this.